The Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr. Speaker, well, what a bizarre speech that was from Scott Simpson. The government, the great nanny state National Party, is going to stop somebody having a black and white ribbon or a green ribbon or a red ribbon or even a blue ribbon on their car because it will frighten the electors. It will frighten the electors, Scott Simpson said. Mr. Speaker, that is so absurd a statement that it should just be a joke, but actually it's not a joke because this government is going to interfere in election day activities that have been going for 150 years, with people allowed to wear proudly on their lapel a rosette to say which party they're supporting. And Mr. Simpson says that will frighten the voters. Well, apparently it won't terribly frighten the voters, Mr. Simpson, because this bill, intimidate, he says, this bill actually allows you to wear the rosette in the polling booth. If you're a scrutineer, you can wear the rosette. Now, if there was anywhere, Mr. Speaker, that the elector was going to be intimidated, you might think that it would be in the polling booth. But no, it's okay to wear it in the polling booth, but by God, Mr. Speaker, don't wear it out in the streets because the dogs will run off yapping, the cats will flee, and the people will hide behind their doors. Mr. Speaker, that is bizarre and that is absurd, and I have never heard so much nonsense spoken in this House before on a matter, actually, that's a very serious matter. This is an electoral amendment bill. It should be seeking consensus. It is really important that in a democracy, on the fundamentals of process and voting, that there is widespread agreement around the House. Yet for petty reasons that Mr. Simpson can do no better than describe as being intimidating of the voters, the National Party, and solely the National Party, wants to impose its will on the people in this House and the country, stopping a practice that has done no harm for 150 years. 150 years, Mr. Simpson. You said that was the period of unbroken democracy in New Zealand, and yes, we should be proud of that. But I've got to say, when I go out on election day and I knock on a door, it's really important, even when it's not an election day, that I'm wearing something on my lapel that identifies me to the person who opens the door. They know who I am, they know why I'm there. I'm not there to persuade them how to vote on election day. I don't talk politics on election day. You can't. And properly you can't. But you can go along and say, have you voted? But before I turn up on somebody's doorstep, I want to be able to be identified to that person as who I represent. And there is no harm, absolutely no harm in that, Mr. Simpson. You have failed utterly to make the case out for a piece of absurdity in this bill, and I hope that you're a little bit more open-minded about it when you chair the select committee that looks at it. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that by and large, Labor will be supporting this bill to the select committee. It's important that it goes there. It makes relatively minor changes, and those minor changes I think are designed to be quite helpful as the bill sets out. It's really important that you have changes that will improve services to voters, candidates and parties, and the bill tries to do that in a range of small but technical ways. It's about improving efficiency by allowing greater use of technology. Most people, particularly younger people, are doing things online. Let them do things online to the maximum extent. Don't do away with the paper-based enrolment system, because some people, like my father, would be absolutely appalled if he had to open a computer and try to enter something on it. But those efficiency aspects are fine. Improving the integrity of the election process, I think, is really important as well. Simplifying and clarifying the law, making the law more internally consistent. So those are the sort of things that are common sense things that you would expect and arising out of the investigation into the 2011 general election, you'd expect to have in there. Using full online enrolment with electronic identity verification, that's good. Greater use of easy vote cards. I think all of us, when we've taking people to the polls, etc. If they've got their easy vote card, it means they can go in. It simplifies the process, makes it easy if they're doing. I do it quite frequently. Most recently, I've got to say, in Ikaroa Rafiti, and by God, they were pleased to see me when I turned up on the door and said I was from the Labor Party. And of course, I don't think the National Party stood in that by-election. Apparently didn't have the courage of its convictions. But those things are quite good. If you're frightened of ribbons, then I guess you'd be frightened to go into Ikaroa Rafiti and confront real people there. But I've got to say that, as well as the absurdity of this, the banning ribbons and banning rosettes, the thing that's really disappointing about this legislation is what the government hasn't put in it. Now, the Electoral Commission is an independent body, and quite properly, the Electoral Commission was told to say, to do an analysis of the voting system if MMP was passed by the electorate and find ways to improve it. Well, the electorate did pass the MMP system. I personally voted for it. I think it's much fairer. But there were worries, and as I went around my electorate, the worry that people most often raised with me was the coattailing system, whereby if you win an electorate and you get 3% of the votes, then you carry 3% of the other MPs in with you. Now, the National Party is quite smart on some things, lacks common sense generally, but it was smart in saying, we know how to rort the system. Nobody much likes the ACT Party. They'll never get over the 5% threshold, but if we gift them our most blue ribbon seat, then ribbons, oh my God, they're illegal now, I forgot. If we give them the chance to get in on a blue ribbon seat like Epsom, then we'll get all these MPs that the country doesn't really want. The electoral system, by and large, wouldn't have in Parliament, but we can smuggle them in on the coattails of a man of no less integrity than John Banks. Now, what I looked at when I looked at the Electoral Commission, they didn't just recommend that that be abolished, they strongly recommended that it be abolished. Now, the Chief Electoral Officer is a man that's been there for a long time by the name of Robert Peden. And Robert Peden said that coattailing was, quote, the biggest single concern that people showed about the MMP system. So here is another example of a national government trying to rort the system, a national government absolutely arrogant about what people wanted and didn't want, and ignored the views of the vast majority of New Zealanders that said we do not want a rort in the system that allows MPs to be coattailed into Parliament. They saw the cup of tea between Mr Key and Mr Banks, and they did not like what they saw. And what's more, Mr Speaker, not only is it a rort to the system, seen by the Electoral Commission, which is independent, as being a rort, but it is also a system that is inherently unfair. Let's take the 2008 election. The ACT Party that year gained 3.65% of the vote. They would not normally have got any Member of Parliament at 3.65. But they stood, not Mr Banks, but Mr Hyde, or Dr Jekyll, one or the other. Mr Hyde, they stood in Epsom, and the National Party gave the seat of Epsom to the ACT Party, and the result of that was that they ended up in this House with 5 seats, Mr Speaker. 5 seats with 3.65% of the vote. Now, the New Zealand First Party, on the other hand, actually narrowly missed out on getting elected that year. It didn't get to the 5% threshold. It got 4.07% of the vote. But they didn't rort a deal with the National Party to get a seat, and with more than 4% of the vote, they got no MPs, and the ACT Party, with 3.65% of the vote, got 5 MPs. Now, I want the next government speaker that stands up to take the call to tell me how that system is fair, to tell this House why the Chief Electoral Officer is wrong in saying New Zealanders don't want this and we don't want it. It's not fair, it's not right. We talk about having a non-corrupt system. That is as close to corruption as we get when the National Party ignores the wishes of the people and did not include that in this legislation.
David Clendon.
Mr Speaker, kia ora koutou. Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to take a short call on this electoral amendment bill. I'd echo the comments already made by other speakers about the importance of this process and the value of it, that each 3 years we investigate our electoral processes, we evaluate them, we look for ways we might make them better. That's an entirely appropriate process.